Doing, Philistines Jr.? How y'all doing tonight?
Oh, there we go. Hi. Welcome. Sorry, chat. I don't know what that was about. Welcome back. I can't tell if I'm the reason. No, it was me. I don't know why. The mixer wasn't working. But I've removed it and re-added it. It seems to be all good. Hi. Soul, hi, Mr. Therapist. Yes, this is Le Monsieur, Mr. Therapist, as you all named him, dubbed him the
Sir Therapist.
LFG Therapy. Hi. Hello, Soul, another person who I can, assume will lead our therapy today. Yes. Hey, Ari, Luke, and Therapist. Hi. Nice beard, dude. Heck yeah. It's a sick beard. Alright, chat. We'll give people like another, minute or two to hop on in. We'll just get rolling. We'll hang out. But you want to introduce yourself? Mr. Therapist, sir?
Sure. My name is Kurt Whithelm. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist based out of the Los Angeles, California area. I have a private practice where I work with a lot of really cool people.
Yeah. So what do you think, not to jump right into it, but I guess in a way to do so, is like the biggest pitfall you find in therapy as a practice that you try to avoid in your own personal practice?
As far as things that I hear a lot of clients talking about and that show up and things that I try to avoid, a lot of it is, especially over this last year, of just getting stuck in our house, getting stuck in routine, like trying to just break up your day into smaller chunks that helps it not feel like everything is all just kind of existing and not feeling productive. So I really try to make it to where some of the things that I talk with my clients about is, get outside for a few minutes each day. Make sure that you, especially for those of us who are spending a lot of time in front of computers, is breaking up your screen time, even 5 or 10 minutes at a time, just helps get me refreshed and recharged for being able to do what's next on my schedule.
Yeah. So, for example, hypothetically, 5 days of in front of a computer straight would not be healthy.
There's a lot of concerns when it comes to sitting down for like 5 days straight like that.
Yeah.
Needing to balance that out with some good, proper rest, good, proper self-care sort of things.
Yeah.
That's sleep.
Yeah. I mean, so what would you say, like, would be a good technique for those that kind of do feel a bit trapped inside? Like, what are things they can do in their homes that you feel is, like, a good way to try and boost mental well-being? Like, like I said, I was kind of stuck at this desk. Like, what were things I could have done then and there for any future subathons?
Future subathons, it's amazing how even just a little bit of movement, even just, stretching, being properly hydrated,
that was
getting
not a problem.
good water.
Yeah.
And I get that, you have to put your mind and your body through a lot of extremes doing something like for 5 days. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And I know for me, like, I'm a coffee junkie. Like, I would take in way too much caffeine or something like that. So
yeah.
Really not overdoing it on caffeine. Even, and I know that you can be quite the night owl, but it's amazing how much just even looking out the window at natural light helps to reset our bodies. That making regular breaks like that just to help keep you kind of moving a little bit, kind of, stimulating your brain in a little bit different way than just kind of the blue screen from your computer.
Yeah. I mean, like, it is interesting, but at the same time, it's a bit, what's the term for it? Like, it's just, there's such a draw to it to kind of escape from, like, the monotony of doing things around the house, because that in itself can get so cyclical. I mean,
right. Yeah, a lot of the things that people have talked to me about here over this last year during the pandemic have largely been like, I'm doing the same things day in and day out. And a lot of the advice that I give is about, do something that kind of breaks up the time a little bit. Like make a Friday, like have a distinct different thing that you do. So that way you can at least be like, oh, I recognize that a certain amount of time has passed because it's been since I've done that. But what you're talking about is when you get into that monotony, it's taking a break from your regular routine. It's not making your break the new routine. Like you still need to do all of those proper self-care things to be able to stay psychologically, mentally healthy.
Yeah. So then, from that point, I mean, like, what do you think are signs? Because it's sometimes easy to feel like I'm okay, I'm doing fine, and it's like easy to just kind of shove down like the unhealthiness of your routine. So what do you think are like good signs people can be looking out for, and signs that you're doing things right? Because sometimes it's easy to overlook what you are doing right and just kind of still just tear yourself down.
So a really good practice to get into, and this is one of those really odd things about things like even low-grade depression, is that it's something where you don't quite recognize how stuck you are or how bad things get until somebody else points it out for you. And so one of the ways that you can counterbalance that is to spend a little bit of time at the end of each day just manually writing down, here's some things that I accomplished today. That helps to give it a little bit more of a tangible feeling. And that way you're not just kind of floating through these thoughts and these emotions that you're just kind of stuck in. So being able to have some really good just end of the day review of like, I got this done today, that helps to just create some behavioral momentum for you.
Yeah. I mean, so what do you think are the things that you personally do to like even pull up when you're kind of already on the downhill, to kind of pull up out of ruts? Like my advice to people whenever they're feeling down has always just been like, take a hot shower, throw your sheets in the dryer and get them just nice and warm. So you just kind of cocoon yourself and just like watch a nice show that you love, just something classic. Like that's kind of my go-to. Things have been rough today and I need them to be less rough routine.
Yeah. I love it. And if you have things that work for you like that, like, a big part of mental health is just finding what works for you. And there's a lot of things that work for a lot of people. And for me, one of the things that I do at the end of each day is I try to stick to a little bit of a yoga stretching routine. And I was given some really good advice by another therapist a while ago that was like, even on those days that you don't want to, still just roll out your yoga mat. You're at least going to be tempted to sit down and at least stretch a little bit. But if you get to that step of just like, I'm going to set myself up for even just a little bit of success, then that is better than not making even that step. So for me, one of the things that I do to wind down at the end of each day, I at least roll out my yoga mat. There's a lot of days that I use it, a lot of days that I don't. And it's just having a good, healthy routine that you're able to close out your day with.
Yeah.
So is a healthy thing sitting in your bed watching random YouTube videos until you don't realize that it's like 3 or 4 in the morning?
I gotta say that should not be something that you do with any sort of regularity whatsoever. And there's a lot of psychological research that says that, being in your bed should be reserved for like bed activities, that, not having even like your TV set up. And I get it if you're like, you're in your dorm or whatever, and there's not a lot of other places to do, but keep your bed for things like sleeping and sex, and that trains your mind to better be able to keep your sleep time routine. And the more things that you start to associate your bed with, the more that you can start to kind of confuse that subconscious part of your brain and make it more difficult. So if you have like problems falling asleep, you have problems waking up in the middle of the night, that you might want to look at what even just you're tending to associate your bed with, and so that way you can prime yourself to just sleep better.
Yeah. I mean, do you think there's any like what's the term, like just like false information out there? I know that there's like a lot of quick tricks to fall asleep or to relax and stuff throughout the day? I mean, you know, they talk about like a lot of accurate things like working out and stuff are good ways to raise mental health. But do you think there's any pitfalls and just kind of mistruths out there that have been, you know, kind of ill-serving people as a whole?
There's tons of things out there that are, you know, given as kind of these blanket sort of things that either, you know, work real fast. You know, a lot of things like, you know, you hear about like these psychological life hacks or stuff like this are things that might work for really short-term sort of things.
Yeah.
Even things that people rely on for longer term sorts of things. You know, if we're talking about falling asleep here, you know, things like melatonin, which, you know, is a thing that helps a lot of people fall asleep, but our bodies do become used to having this kind of external input into our bodies and stops producing those good healthy chemicals in the first place. And so then we become more and more reliant on them. So one of the better things is it takes a little bit of effort. A couple of weeks of it is having a pretty regular routine, trying to, you know, at least put yourself to bed within about the same half an hour window each night. And whether or not you fall asleep, engaging in that routine is what ends up helping you.
And thank you, Blitzer, for the resub. I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt Kurt here, but thank you very, very much appreciated, and welcome back. What about hormones? Oh yeah, by the way, chat, if you guys have any questions for Kurt, just type them in chat and just like maybe even put just like Kurt and then colon your question. That way I just know to like, so it just stands out at me. But yeah, he's a fully licensed therapist here at your service. But yeah, I believe it was a disclaimer that he's not offering like personalized therapy to you today. So know that he's not going to be able to like solve your problems in a snap here, but you know, we can give some generalized advice that is just general guidelines you can try and enact, but nothing here is professional targeted at you advice. Is that well put?
That's pretty well put. Like, you can put questions and it may be something personal in nature, and I'll do my best to kind of answer things in a broad way. But if it is something that, you know, you are looking for some professional advice, I do encourage you to reach out for, you know, mental health and wherever your area is. So
yeah,
I'm not going to be your therapist tonight, but I'm more than happy to talk about mental health stuff and people's mental health questions, even if it comes from a little bit of a personal place.
Yeah. So one of them asked, "Why am I so insanely cool?" Talking about themselves. Probably because you had really cool parents and a really cool personality. What is the probability of the world getting destroyed? Cool. And then the other one is, how do you deal best with pressure?
Dealing with pressure. This is an awesome one, because a lot of times what this feeling that comes up with pressure is some sort of anxiety, maybe a little bit of depression that comes with it, because those two feelings are really closely related. But a big part of dealing with pressure is we have this really shorthand saying in our field of name it to tame it. Name what's bothering you. And a lot of times what that does is that helps our mind and our emotions be able to pick up on what it is that's specifically bugging us. And once we start to accept it, then we start to be able to internally start developing our own plans of how we're actually going to deal with stuff. Yeah. So, you know, when I've got projects coming up or something, it's like, oh, I'm coming up to another deadline. I, you know, like, all right, I've got to do this. And if I'm going to do this, here's kind of the time that I have to do this. That helps to just kind of develop a plan that helps to lower that anxiety. It helps to deal with that pressure.
Yeah, and that's kind of like been my experience of like my worst anxieties always are rooted where I have the most uncertainty, whether that's uncertainty in myself and my abilities to get something done, or just uncertainty in the fact that I came into it without a plan, and it's something I haven't faced before. But I am curious though, in the moments where it's kind of too late, you're already in it, you're already in that anxiety and in that uncertainty. What do you think is your best method of just kind of picking yourself up by the bootstraps there?
Sure. So I like to talk with a lot of my clients about feelings being on a scale of like 1 to 10, where 1 is things are going wonderfully and 10 is about worst case scenario. So where I often associate kind of this level of pressure that you're talking about, we're talking about 8s and 9s at this point. You know, 10's like maybe full blown panic attacks. when you're at an 8 or a 9, and really all you can think about is kind of the next couple of minutes in front of you, the thing that a lot of my clients find really helpful is not trying to get completely out of the feeling, but just focusing on like, what does it take to get me to a 7? And really just taking it in kind of a very incremental, step-by-step sort of piece. And because when you're feeling that kind of pressure, a lot of times it's suffocating and it feels like you can only think, a couple of moments ahead. So embrace that you're only going to think a couple of moments ahead and focus on it in just bite-sized pieces.
Yeah, so just kind of breaking it down into something that's less intimidating and more manageable.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, actually, we got a few good ones in here. How would you suggest dealing with parents trying to force a religion upon you that you don't believe in? Ooh, that's probably a really common one.
This is a really common thing, and this question is specific to religion, but I see this a lot with any sort of ideologies, whether it's political, whether it's religious, whether it's just even any kind of worldviews that might not be tied to those kinds of things. There's a lot that happens in the mental health world where the answer starts with "it depends." And in this case, it really depends on what your relationship is with your parents. That the healthier overall that your relationship is, the more directly that you can talk to them about how their approach to it is impacting your relationship with them. In more extreme cases, I've seen times where this kind of stuff ends up in being abuse and really leading into a lot of, times where, depending on how powerless somebody is, ends up needing to get things like family services involved or law enforcement in order to help negotiate some of this.
Yeah.
Most people fall somewhere in the middle of that. And a lot of these kinds of relational things mean involving some sort of healthy boundaries around stuff that when we get to these kinds of places, it's being able to set clear limits on what's allowed and what's not allowed, and being able to set clear expectations of what's going to happen beyond, if those boundaries tend to get crossed or tend to get pushed across. And that helps us to create a consistent expectation of our behaviors, and lets your parents or lets your family know this. It's not necessarily a win-all thing. Most people that I hear in these situations, it's once they're able to launch out of the house, be able to establish their own lives a little bit more. But in the meantime, having healthy boundaries and healthy conversations about those boundaries is usually most people's first step.
And so, do you think that is honestly a solid point to bring in a mediator like a therapist, or do you think that is something that might kind of stoke the flames more than you'd care to?
Yeah, if you can't get these conversations done on your own with your family, having somebody on the outside. And I know, there's a lot of people who just feel that, whether it's stigma about therapy or anything like that, that they may, have their own resistance of involving somebody else in a family discussion like this. Anybody who can help to clarify the process in which you talk, there's a lot of families or couples that'll come into me that they're miles apart in whatever it is that their argument's about, but a lot of times it comes down to how they're arguing that makes it to where that becomes the first thing that has to be addressed before they can even start to come to some sort of resolution.
Yeah, and that's been my experience, and I think that was honestly the best put I've ever heard it. Is this the idea of sometimes you can absolutely change the minds of the people around you, or have a different type of relation with them, and it's all about how you present your ideas and not what your ideas are.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, we got a new question here. It's about dealing with claustrophobia, but if I were to generalize it, what they're kind of saying is they know it's irrational, but it's still something that gets them. I mean, how would you suggest dealing with something like that in a generalized form of anybody who struggles with gaining anxiety or even panic attacks from things that are just you know deep down that it's not something that should be bothering you, that it's not a real thing, but it's still just kind of visceral.
Yeah. So the way that we process a lot of information is we have kind of the cognitive track, which is what you're talking about when we know that it's irrational. That's a very cognitive sort of description. Anxiety is not a cognitive thing in and of itself. It's an emotional thing. Now, anxiety is a emotional thing that can start with a lot of feelings or with a lot of thoughts, and it is something where doing some of those thought stopping techniques of like, I know this is irrational, and a lot of people that I work with early on in anxiety treatments are, I know that I should feel this way, but I still feel different. And it's that but part of it that we really focus on early in treatment. The other part of this is practice makes better. And a lot of anxiety treatments end up working on some sort of exposure to environments like this. It might not be, starting you off in a, small room with closed doors, but it's even just being able to, sit in a room with the door slightly more closed. That allows for us to really learn that being in that kind of a environment is more okay. Like there's a lot of anxiety practice where I talk with my clients about it's about being better at being anxious. And it's the practicing being anxious piece of it that helps us to eventually match up where we know that, all right, those feelings are irrational and I can help it and I can deal with it. Yeah.
And that's something like it's no secret to chat here that I was raised with autism, and that was something I heard a lot through therapy when I was growing up, of like getting okay being not okay, and then also being able to admit that you're not okay, being able to be like, I'm not okay, but it will be, things will get better from here, I'm not dying in this moment, I'm not in pain in this moment, especially like with those irrational things. Like I had like severe touch aversion, I had problems with like certain like textures on clothes and stuff that felt like death itself on the inside and stuff like that, where it's just a matter of I think, if I were to sum up what I think you're trying to get is like breaking down your anxieties into small little steps you can take to introduce it very slowly and in a very controlled way, in which you can kind of realize like, hey, this door is a crack open and the walls have not shut in, they have not closed on me, and I'm okay. And then just kind of taking it small step by small step and not feeling like I have to make the big leap to it in a day, or else it's not real progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I see the follow-up question here about even getting to this part about getting to sleep with even some of the stuff going. And it sounds like, you're doing some of this practice type stuff here. I would look at, just kind of creating some different distractions for you to think about that helps lead you to sleep, because something else that comes up with a lot of anxious people is just kind of this running commentary in their mind of, here's things that I should do, or here's things that I should worry about. We're starting to train our minds to, all right, here are things that generally lead me well to sleep. For a lot of people, they find, even having some sort of mindfulness sort of guided talk that helps to keep them focused on something else can help them make that step towards being better at being anxious.
Yeah.
I see another question here also that's just what is some good advice for impulse control?
So impulse control can take a variety of different things, and this can be anything from like ADHD, sort of hyperactivity, impulse control. A lot of times people with addiction issues, whether it's substance or behavioral, will describe themselves as being impulsive. Sometimes people with some eating disorder type things experience kind of some of this impulsive stuff as well. This is one where there's a really wide variety of causes of this kind of stuff, but one that I didn't mention here is just kind of is it something that we just feel like we need like a new stimulation to get us to be able to prop ourselves up or focus back on something else? I was talking with Ari here before the stream started of like, I know that I can kind of impulsively just start looking around and clicking around, even like during some of my video sessions. So one of the things that I set myself up with is just having a bunch of different stuff around me to be able to manipulate, because I've got little toys and pens that I click and play with, and this is stuff that helps me to be able to draw my focus back to where it needs to be while still scratching kind of that, attention everywhere sort of itch.
Yeah. So then, kind of down the vein of just like not being able to stop, like that in impulsivity thing, I'm not sure if it even counts as impulse, but that just not being able to slow your brain down, especially for me, like the insomnia at night is kind of, I impulsively have these thoughts that I wish I wasn't. I'm like, don't think about that. Don't think about that now. This is not the time for that. And yet it still just kind of happens, and you're like, oh man, and when you try not to think about it, and it's still, that kind of makes it worse. And then like, is there a psychological term for how kind of things seem to be almost heightened at night, even as far as like emotions and how in your head you are?
Yeah, it's a lot of what we refer to as like thought flooding, or just like racing thoughts. And this can have any number of causes, but for the vast majority of people, this is because when they lay down to go to bed at night, this is the first time where their brain hasn't been occupied by something else all day long. Whether we're in school, whether we're at work, whether we're messing around on the internet or doing streams or anything like this, is that all of that takes processing power from our brains. And one of the ways that our brains rests is it takes all of the little bits and pieces of information from throughout the day and it just tries to organize them. And if the first time that you aren't getting outside stimulation to your brain is when you lay down to go to bed and there's nothing else there, that's usually where a lot of people find for the first time during the day, all right, my brain's now got the chance to think of all of the thoughts that I haven't had all day long.
Yeah.
And then they end up in kind of the situation that you're describing here.
Yeah.
So for a lot of people, it's some of the answer to this is create the space for your brain to go through this process intentionally. So that way it's at a more convenient and planned time than when it's really inconvenient when you're laying down and trying to go to sleep.
Yeah. And so that would be probably like meditation and therapy, yeah?
Mindfulness. Yeah, there's this great ancient Chinese proverb that says that you should spend 10 minutes a day meditating. Unless you're too busy, then you should spend an hour. And this just goes for how long that cultures all across the world have really recognized the mental processes that we need to just create the space to deal with stuff. And not every meditation is going to be this wonderful world of like everything's just thinking of birds on the beach or whatever it is, but it's being able to create that space for all of the thoughts that need to kind of just be dealt with, and then you've got like this nice confined space in your day where you're at least paying attention to them, and that helps them kind of go away.
Yeah, and I think that you really nailed on the head with this idea of like when you need it the most is when you feel like it the least, and when you kind of, and I feel like that is kind of what hits a lot with what we're seeing today in like depression and loneliness, is like when you kind of really need to reach out to people and connect with them, that's when you feel the most like being alone, in the sense of poking a bruise, where it's like on some level that's not the healthiest thing, but it's your instinct almost.
Yeah, and I make the reference a lot of times that depression's one of those things where it makes you not do any of the things that would make you not be depressed. Like go and socialize. This is something that you're bringing up here, that for people who are depressed, it's I want to do anything but go out and talk with people. Like that's one of the things that helps people. I want to do anything other than like get up and go exercise. I want to do anything other than like eat healthy food. Like all of those are very behavioral type things that we do that help steer us away from those depressed feelings. And so it becomes kind of this very juxtaposed sort of feeling of like, I know that I should do these things, I just don't want to or I can't. But as soon as people start doing it with any sort of consistency, those feelings go away.
Yeah, and then there's also the issue of like things becoming self-perpetuating, right? Like where you kind of disappear off the face of the earth, and then you're like, no one's reached out, but also you're not putting yourself out there, and like, you know, everyone else is also kind of experiencing that same thing. And so when everyone else is closing themselves off, and every person is saying, well, I wouldn't if someone reached out, no one's bothering to be the one to do that, right? And so it can kind of
There's
become
always
this
the time.
self-perpetuating cycle.
Yeah, and so it really helps to be able to take this and just be the one. Like, if there's anything that the last year of this pandemic has really shown, is that as a society we're kind of relaxing the rules on what we consider weird now. Like, it's like, oh yeah, it's been months since I've heard from you, it's great to hear from you.
Yeah.
And it does take a little bit of effort because, you know, not everybody's quick to return messages these days, and you know, they might be stuck in kind of their own funk, but it might take reaching out a few times to help somebody else, and then you can prop up each other. And that's, you know, really where, honestly, I've even developed some new friendships out of just kind of like, oh, I'm hanging out online with this person, and they've got somebody else that they're bringing along. That just kind of is, I guess, to boil it down here, put yourself out there a little bit and know that there's going to be plenty of opportunities, even if you can't see them yet, to continue to have opportunities to succeed.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that we've pointed out here a lot. It's something I've talked about many times on this stream, of like the idea that, you know, it's gonna be when you need people the most is when you're gonna be the most fearful of being a burden, of being a downer, of bringing down the mood and ruining things, and just that it's just gonna annoy people. And I've always been a real strong advocate of saying that, you know, you'd be surprised how badly and how much people want to be there for you, especially in a time in which, you know, that sense of community is hard to find, and this idea of camaraderie can be, you know, everything to someone, if not even life-saving in some case scenarios, right? But on the far other end of it, you know, there's the people that are struggling with being alone. But what would be some advice you have as far as being happy, being on your own, finding peace and happiness within yourself instead of looking for it always in other people?
So a big part of that is just accepting and recognizing and embracing where you're at right now. That, you know, there's a lot of people who end up with these aspirational ideas of who they should be and start comparing themselves to, you know, I'm not there yet, I could be doing better, I could be exercising more, doing this project, learning this new skill, starting my own stream, any of this kind of stuff. That people just feel stuck, like, I lost, you know, months thinking that I should be doing this and I'm still stuck in the same place. All of that comes back to this place of, you have to be honest with yourself of where you're at and be able to start celebrating the steps that you are doing, not comparing yourself to the steps that you're not doing. And, you know, this is, you know, where it's really easy to get kind of future trippy of like, well, if I just did this, or on the negative end of this, if this happens, then it starts to catastrophize. All of this is coming back to, where am I at today? What can I build from today that helps me to actually start taking the steps towards those ideas?
Yeah. And then I think that also society is shifting in a way of like promoting the idea of companionship. I mean, you see it throughout movies, you see it throughout television, and especially social media. This idea of like these idealized, like over edited relationships. These things that just kind of promote a non-reality.
Yeah, I'll maybe offer a new term here, is over curated. That these are very specific things that are being put out there and described to people of what they should be. And a lot of my approach is, find out what makes you you, and the parts that you can turn into successes. And nobody else can write that script for you. And there's been a lot of things even in my own life where I'm like, oh, I need to do all of the things. I need to have this account, this social media account, this kind of posting thing that just didn't ever end up sticking because it's not naturally who I am. And I don't need to be somebody who's doing this kind of stuff. And that comes back to that point of acceptance where you're at.
Yeah.
That is, find out what works for you. Not everybody's going to have the same, do these 5 steps to be successful that works for them.
Yeah, and I think that leads beautifully into the other question I got, which was about, figuring out priorities and struggling with procrastination and just putting the right things first, kind of school now, got to get my activities done later, and just kind of sticking to that with a good resolve.
Yeah, so I will self-admit I procrastinate a bunch of things. And part of this is I like to at least, label myself in this case as I'm overly optimistic with the amount of things that I can get done in any sort of day. And then what ends up happening is whatever's the next deadline, the one that I end up prioritizing next.
Yeah.
That's one kind of procrastination. Other kinds of procrastination are just like a really strong reluctance to actually having to do something. And what I found is, for the vast majority of people that I work with, is once they actually start getting started on those kinds of projects, they find that they're not as bad as they feared. And so again, this is kind of get things started. If it's, I need to do this assignment for school, or I need to do this work project. Some of my school age clients, what I talk about is get home, do like the first 3 math problems for your homework. Like, you can get up and you can, if you need to do a bunch of other things, at least get the book out, kind of like the roll out the yoga mat sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's just get yourself started, and you're more likely to follow through on things. And because a lot of times our brains don't like incomplete sort of things. You do just a half of a musical beat or something, and most people will follow through on it. And this is the way with even just kind of our tasks. Like, if you can get started on something, you're making yourself in a situation that's more likely to complete it.
So you're kind of like exploiting your own OCD in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, so what would you recommend then because it can be very cyclical in the sense of just like you set a goal and you miss it, and so then you're kind of down on yourself, you're hard on yourself, and you're like, oh, what's the point? And that just leads you to procrastinate on the next thing, and it just kind of goes one after the other. Like, how, I mean, I guess that is kind of like a common trend between all the things we've discussed so far. Just like, once it's become a cycle, how would you recommend kind of yanking yourself out of that?
The great things about a lot of cycles is that, and especially ones that tend to repeat themselves, is you can break that cycle at any point, beginning, middle, or end. So the cycle that you're bringing up here of, not getting something done, feeling bad about ourselves, and then setting ourselves like this new goal that, we'll make up for it. So part of this might be, behavioral thing. Like, if you get the project done in the first place, then you don't feel bad, and then you don't set yourself up for this next success thing. So that's one way of doing it. One way of looking at this is giving yourself a smaller win, smaller project in the meantime. So I didn't get this one done, I'm gonna feel good if I get this other project done. But that's a really heavy lift. It's a really big idea. Maybe what I need to do is set a couple of smaller goals in the meantime that helps get my behavior or my emotions picked up from feeling so bad about the last one that I missed. The other one is, really breaking down kind of the mindset of like, why am I into this same cycle over and over again? Is it that I'm just not really attempting to do anything else? And that comes with a little bit more introspection and a little bit more
mindfulness,
having to again accept where you're at.
And then I think like the other end of it is just like overworking yourself, trying to be everything for everyone, and just kind of violently in the sense of just like really extremely committed to it due to like a fear of just disappointing yourself and those around you.
Yes.
To the point where like it's obsession at the cost of your health, where people are pulling all-nighters and just trying to juggle too much. Yeah,
and so that's really where taking a look at yourself, and this might even be something that, talking with a therapist, or even a really good friend about this, of why are you putting yourself into this situation? Is it this fear of letting other people down? Yeah, it might be looking at just kind of codependency type issues of like, I have to be everything for everybody because that's where my worth comes from. And a lot of this even goes back to the question we were talking about earlier of being able to set healthy limits with other people, and that not everybody's going to be happy with you every single moment. And so, kind of min-max your life in this way of like, make as many people at least kind of happy most of the time, but know that some people are going to be upset with you no matter what.
So you kind of sound like that's where your worth come from. So from your perspective, where do you think is the place for your worth to be coming from? Is it a singular place, or is it from many places? I mean, where do you best focus that
this is
concern?
A really awesome and really personal question for a lot of people, because it's about coming down to what are your values, what speaks to you. And for anybody who is seeking out therapists for this kind of a question, there's a particular kind of therapy that I really like that's called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, that really helps to hone in on what your values are, helping to identify them, and then help you evaluate if the way that you're living is consistent with those values. And I've gone through this kind of an exercise with a bunch of clients, and every time that I do it with my clients, I kind of come back to what are my values. And typically what I find for myself is I value things that bring authenticity, that I can speak authentically, that people tend to know that when I speak, I mean what I say. I also like, I really also value kind of having some fun. So I might be playful in it, but for people who get to know me, whether it's my clients, whether it's my friends, that they can kind of see that there's this playfulness or this irreverence that I like to bring to things that just kind of, it helps to ease through the day. And I like to evaluate, in these kinds of things, do I live through this, or is this something where I'm feeling kind of off because I'm putting myself into a bunch of situations that I just don't care about?
Yeah.
And that helps me when I'm able to put it through that lens, look at, all right, these are things that I can maybe not prioritize so much in my life because I'm finding more value out of engaging in these other things that really help me.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it is very interesting because, again, you just find people now more than ever really hitting points in life that, especially for like the older crowd, they didn't really think they would, of just looking at just the paths that are in front of them, as far as a lot of people are looking for new jobs and stuff like that. And I myself have discovered streaming and stuff, and it's coming to a point where you're really forced to be stuck indoors with your values, and often with family too, and really rebalancing family dynamics in a way that works for months together on end. And so what's interesting to me is like, again, that shift that everyone's just kind of been forced into now, but kind of in a less voluntary shift. I saw chat talking about how they found that when they were younger, they were more open-minded, they were way more volunteering to be the one picked in class and go up and talk to the class and present and stuff like that. As they got older, they found that they were more shy and just kind of begging to be not noticed whenever the teacher was picking for an example. I mean, what would you attribute that to from just like a psychology therapeutic perspective?
I would want to look at kind of what the changes are that have happened during that time. Is it bad experience with peers? For people who grow up with the same kinds of classmates around them, if it's just trying to avoid the limelight because there's a group of people that are going to pick on you for even putting yourself out there, then that's going to be an entirely different thing than if this is coming from a place of just being really withdrawn and depressed. This is really kind of a thing where there's a bunch of different areas that would help to explore why this is developed in this particular way, because getting to the root cause of it helps to determine the approach to resolve it. So if it's, you know, a dealing with peers problem, then you deal with the peers. If it's, you know, a crippling sense of shyness and anxiety that's developing, it's dealing with shyness and anxiety. And, you know, just from kind of the outside perspective, like, yeah, it's really hard to be on this track where you're noticing yourself pulling further and further back. But this one would really need a really healthy discussion why that this is happening.
Yeah. I mean,
and I'm seeing in the comments here, this one does seem to be really dealing with peers here. And so, you know, part of this is if there are good peers, then those are the ones that you focus on. And part of it's, you know, if it's really toxic people who are giving you a hard time, it's being able to show them that you're not affected by what they're doing. Because a lot of people who you know, kind of come from that toxic sort of place, you know, don't feed the trolls. But when this is happening in real life, it's you got to go one step further, which is show the trolls that they're not affecting you. And you know, it's kind of almost like this skill of like, all right, I'm going to acknowledge that what you did there just happened, just to show you that, like, I heard you, because I don't want you to escalate it to just like make sure that you know, you're trying to hear me,
get attention.
Yeah. Hear you. But it's like, oh, okay, are you done? And then being able to move on to your next step.
Yeah.
And this is hard, especially when you're outnumbered. You know, no bully really operates on their own, or really toxic person operates on their own. They've got their little minions around them. And so this is where there's also some safety in numbers. There's other people that you can kind of group up with as well to not fight them, but just, you know, it's a lot harder to target somebody who's surrounded by other people. Yeah,
which again beautifully transitions into the other question in chat, which is dealing with anger. So like when people are provoking you, especially, what would be your suggestion for de-escalating, you know, the anger of others towards yourself and anger within yourself?
Sure. So there's a couple of different kinds of anger here. There's kind of the in the moment sort of almost rage anger. That's something where when we talk about classic anger management techniques, that's what that applies to. That's the, you know, take the slow deep breaths, count backwards from 10, that most people have been given that advice very poorly as some sort of long-term answer to what's going on.
Yeah.
No, those are in the moment sort of, you know, handle it sort of situations. It helps to really look at anger as a loss of control. I can't control something in this moment, and that's what my feelings are coming from. I had a different expectation than what is happening right now, and that's not happening, and that's bringing up this feeling. And if you can get yourself to, in these anger feelings, to look at that question, what do I want control over right now? What is out of my control? And if you can tell the difference, that's the wonderful last step of this is, you know, being able to choose, like, okay, this is something that I wanted under my control, but I have no control over it, and I'm angry about it. But I have to remind myself that this is out of my control.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because, and here's bringing a bit of personal therapy here, like between you and I, is that I think I was always raised with the idea of when I'm in that moment of just being really hot-headed, I just been taught to kind of walk away first, just remove myself, because whatever it is, like being in the presence of it is not helping me in that moment. And I'm not in a point where I can have a productive conversation. When you're that angry, you're just not going to solve your problems.
Absolutely.
And so I usually will like walk out, go for a walk, and sometimes it's a bit abrupt, and sometimes that's borderline insulting to the people that are trying to have the conversation with me. But I come back and I go, you know, I most of the time it's just a lot of honesty. I'm just like, I was upset, but I've breathed it out. I've gotten away from it. I've gotten a little perspective on it, literally and metaphorically. You know, getting some distance from it. And so I think that that's kind of where I have found my most productive conversations, and my ability to escape my anger has come from best, is being able to just find the strength in myself to just walk away. and not permanently. I'm not running from it. I'm not hoping it'll solve itself, or that in doing so I'll hurt the other people. Like, it's not out of spite. It's just out of giving myself a chance to be the one in control, and not of my anger be the one in control of my next words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for a lot of people who get into that super angry sort of feeling, it's moving us to a part of our brain called the amygdala. And most people have heard of, this is the part of our brain that's responsible for fight or flight. That we are literally not in the part of our brain that's communicating well, that's being able to respond really well, like you were just describing. It's being able to get ourselves out of the situation enough to where we're not operating out of that amygdala sort of fight or flight response, as you very beautifully illustrated. And so it's being able to put ourselves in a situation where we're better able to move back into our neocortex sort of response. That's the part of our brain that helps to communicate and, be able to express empathy and that kind of stuff, that actually makes those conversations productive, just like you were just describing there.
Yeah. And then also, I think that it's also very easy to kind of blur the lines of anger and anxiety. If you find yourself often feeling angry about a loss of control, like, loss of control also comes very hand in hand with anxiety. And sometimes I found that, prior to being diagnosed, I have anxiety. It's often associated with the autism that I have. And so I found that I could also kind of deal with a lot of my anger by just addressing my anxiety, and whether that be through medication or meditation, depends on who you are as an individual. And obviously, like, there's many factors to it, like your past and your any underlying conditions or like psychological or physical, right? But I found that kind of sometimes that could be the root of a lot of my anger.
And you're wonderfully bringing back something that I mentioned a little bit earlier, is how depression and anxiety are really closely related feelings. Anger is very much in this too, and I like to refer to this as the 3 control feelings. That we've talked about how anger is the wanting to control things in the moment and not being able to. Anxiety is a future. I need to control something about the future to make things okay. And whether that future is 5 seconds from now or 5 years from now, our brains don't really understand the difference between those. And so we can really work ourselves up. Depression is related in this too, as this is that I don't have control over something in the past. And so a lot of those feelings end up being time oriented. And so, like you said, if there's a lot of things where anger and anxiety are just like, I wanted to control something, I didn't control it. So that's that bounce between anxiety back to anger. And like you said, if you're able to deal with the anxiety, a lot of times you'll find that the anger or even that depression feelings tends to go away as well.
Yeah. I mean, so not like, hopefully it's not personal. If it is, you don't have to answer. But as far as when you were a kid, like, what do you think was something you would wish you had handled better, and maybe even something that you to this day still struggle with?
When I was a kid, I was very angry. Like, there was a lot of things where I wanted to have things go my way and then just didn't. And I'm from a family that a lot of times the message was, don't get angry. Well, that's a lot different advice than I give a lot of people now today. Is anger is a very natural feeling. It's not something that should be feared. It's something that, when embraced correctly, ends up becoming an extremely healthy thing. And when we find that it's healthy, it doesn't reach the extremes that it has before. So there was a lot of times when I was growing up where, I'd find myself getting into fights with peers. I'd find myself just, getting into this rage and then, breaking down into these crying fits that took me a very long time and a lot of my own therapy and a lot of my own practice to be able to just kind of, here's what I can control. Here's, when things get out of my control, here's things that I can do to better respond to things. That doesn't mean that it has to be okay. It's being able to be like, I will be okay even though this has happened. And it's a slower thinking sort of process that takes some practice, but practice makes better when it comes to these kinds of skills.
Now, do you think there was like a therapist at the time that you found particularly inspiring for any particular reasons, or?
You know what it was is it was a therapist for me that wasn't afraid to be very honest with me and very direct about her observations as far as like, here's what's getting in your way. And she knew at the time it was going to make me angry because that was not something that I can control her saying on, even though she was absolutely right, which was something else that I couldn't control. But she made me sit with that feeling of like, you know, hey, I'm, you know, kind of prodding you on this and making you have to deal with this. I mean, I was a little bit older at the time. I was in my teenage years. And it was something that it took me a few sessions to really be able to understand what she was saying, more than just like cognitively understanding it, but accepting that what she was saying was actually true. And it was at that point where it was like, all right, I don't have to worry about everybody else. I'm trying for them, and it was reminding myself of those kinds of situations.
Yeah, and I think that is something that I've always enjoyed about you, and it's something I've always disliked about therapies and the therapists in the past, of like just sugarcoating things. And in watching After My Feelings, it's like, you know, I naturally want to defend my own actions and my own feelings and why what I'm doing is fine and not a bad habit, etc., etc. So I don't need that done for me, you know, which is why I like sometimes when I come to you and I'm just like, you know, I was probably wrong, likely, and you're just like, yeah, you were. And it's like, you know, maybe sans profanity, but it's in the tone, it's implied. But you know, it's refreshing. It is nice to just kind of get that awakening, just slap in the face, that you don't get often. I mean, I don't know if that's just a regional thing, but especially here in LA, I find like I just go around and around, and everybody is just feeding in to every part of you, the best and the worst parts of you. I mean, you have these people that dislike you for reasons that you will never know, and they will never tell you. And they'll see you and they'll be like, oh, hey, bud. And like, it's like, just tell me you don't like me, tell me why, and I can work on that. But I can't make progress if I don't know that there are people I'm hurting, if I'm making missteps, if I'm offending people, or if I'm just, you know, coming short on certain expectations.
Yeah, and you know, this goes back to even just kind of the amount of my own personal work that I've done for this. You know, I brought up one of my big values is authenticity. Like, and I'm glad that you're reflecting. Like, this is the experience of what it's like to work with me. Is I'm honest. It doesn't mean that I'm, you know, always like a jerk about it. I mean, there's just not holding, like, I'm not going to throw confetti at every, you know, little, you know, success sort of thing that you do. That it's all a part of this accountability aspect. And when it comes to picking a therapist or working with a therapist, if you've never been to therapy before, as I'm seeing a couple of comments here in the stream, or even if you are working with a therapist and you're like, you know, I want them to be more like that, or I want them to be in this different way, the number one thing that makes therapy work above all else, no matter what their license is, no matter what their age is, their gender, their you know, even clinical skills, is a lot of research into therapy is just that you know that you and your therapist are doing the right path together, that you agree on the way that you're working towards the solutions. That above all else is going to predict your therapy success.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too, and it's something that I was really bad about as a kid. I mean, like, because my parents were divorced, and so there was like a lot of required therapy around that time. And I remember the thing that bothered me the most and it was a lot on me, is that you come in expecting them to just give you the answers and the solutions right off the bat. You're just like, so these are my problems, fix it. Like you're a car and they're just going to tune a few things and you're all good to go. And I think that was something that, again, like I find refreshing to hear nowadays, and something that I felt like some therapists, just again, to protect my feelings, didn't want to tell me. It's like, they don't just have the answers. Sometimes I'd ask a question and I'd be like, so what do I do? And sometimes like, is there a way for me to just fix this outright? And they're just like, that'll take time, or that'll be dependent on you or your values and stuff like that. And that's something I appreciate about you again, is like, sometimes you're not like, there is the answer, there's one answer. It's just, sometimes it's like, there is no one answer, and I'm not going to be the one to give it to you. You're just going to figure that out. And what we can work on helping you find it together, but I'm not giving it to you. I'm not able to do that for you. That there is a limit. That therapists aren't emotional wizards that will wave a wand and your problems are gone.
Yeah, and this is not to say, I mean, there are certain therapists that'll take this to an extreme where it's like, hey, what can I do about this? And they'll be like, let's explore a lot of this. Some therapists, I mean, I will give people some direct things. Like if it's like what should I do about this? Like my throat's dry all the time. Drink more water. Like, there are some things where it's just like, yeah, do this thing. It doesn't work for everything, though. That there are some things that people have to go through their own process before they're ever able to cure that. Like, I'll start out giving some behavioral suggestions of things for people to do. Here's a specific thing to do if somebody's like bullying you at school or at work. Like, it might work in some situations and not all, but it is, a new thing to do. But part of, even in being part of this, target of this kind of behavior is also going through some of the emotional, like, well, what makes you a target in their eyes that helps to make it to where it's not just like, yeah, if I was one of those toxic people, I'd pick on you for these reasons. Like that would only speak to, that part of one person. It might be for somebody completely else, if you're in a school environment like that, where it does take some self-reflection. And that is the part that a lot of therapists can't just say, here's why. It does involve your involvement in coming to those kinds of conclusions.
Yeah. I do want you to know, by the way, there's a bunch of people in chat saying you're pretty awesome. That has been steadily coming through the chat since we started, but just wanted to put that out there. But also, yeah, there is another comment that says that they often will stay up super late to just kind of, in their own way, try and control things and delay the future, like school in the morning. I mean, what advice would you give towards that? Just kind of avoiding the future, whether it be through trying to control things and just extend the time we have before the things we dread, or through escapism, like video games, like these streams, frankly. I mean, that's the reason I watch streams and podcasts, is just leave my own world for an hour or two,
And there can be a healthy aspect of that. Can be. But if this is something that you're consistently coming up across, it's also something that can be very self-sabotaging of, I'm going to kind of try and delay this. And, if you end up staying up way too late at night, then it sets you up to not be successful the next day because you're groggy and tired when you show up at school the next day anyway. And that's going to lead you to not feeling good about that day. And so that's going to make you dread the following day. And that's part of where this cycle, develops for a lot of people. Part of it is really being honest with yourself of what it is that you're trying to delay about school. Is it about peers? Is it about, I don't think that I'm performing well enough, I'm not getting the grades that I want? Then that's going to be, dealing with the academic part. And that takes some honest look at yourself that can be hard for some people. But that's the part that actually allows you to break this cycle, is looking at what the problem is that's really trying to be avoided there, and then dealing with that problem.
Yeah, I think the big problem I faced with schooling was, like, especially with it being online, was just you kind of get this step of removal from it all. It's almost like a very small amount of dissociation, really targeted between yourself and school, where it feels almost less real, and like the consequences of not doing well feel a little less real and doing it online. And so I found it so hard to care, frankly, once it was online. I mean, do you have any advice for someone trying to just buckle down and commit to something that's just they don't care about, frankly, or even when you should?
Yeah, I know this from a student. I did a master's degree. I have a couple of master's degrees, but I did one of them entirely in an online program way before the pandemic, way before it was even cool and then uncool to do online
Way
learning.
before it was cool. Yeah.
I did an online master's degree and fully experienced just kind of this removal from the student's end. I also teach at a couple of universities now in the master's programs in the Los Angeles area. And over this last year, a lot of the classes I've had to do have been online. And I know for a lot of the students hearing me, even myself in delivering some of my class lectures, it still feels very distant because we're wired to be social creatures. We are needing to be around people, no matter how introverted we may be, no matter where our social skills might be, that even just being around other people is something that's really important for how we feel and how we feel connected to people. So when we get into kind of these removed situations, it's something where it's really easy to not stay present because on an evolutionary level, our brains don't understand that even if there is somebody who's talking to us on the other end of the screen, on an evolutionary level, our brains don't register that as really being fully social.
Yeah.
We can develop all sorts of wonderful connections. You've got a great community here that loves what you're doing and is really committed to you, and that's great. And there is a good level of comfort and connection there that helps build a sense of community. And that's one piece of good overall social mental health, that we still do need to be around other people in some capacity some of the times, because I've been hearing people talking about getting their COVID vaccines and being like, this is the first time I've been touched by somebody outside of my family in months. Like, it's just kind of like we get touch starved, we get social starved too, just being around other people.
Yeah, I remember someone's telling me like they shook someone's hand and like almost like teared up from it just because it was so weird and so strange.
Yeah.
It was just such a weird thought, and then you start to hear about and think about like the future generations that are being raised in this right now. Like I was talking about the other day on a stream of like I saw this video of like a teacher teaching really small kids, and she had like a picture of a microphone and a microphone with like a line through it, like the muted symbol, and it's like, hey kids, your microphones are like this and I need to be like this. I'm like, that's just crazy that like that's a part of modern curriculum right now, that like these kids are gonna be learning, some of these are like learning the mute symbol before they're fully understanding the alphabet, right? Like it's kind of nuts. And you wonder what impact that's going to have going forward.
The great thing is humans overall are very adaptable in a number of ways. And, it feels like we're stuck now for a lot of people. And, hopefully is, the pandemic, slows down here and eventually hopefully gets done, is we'll all return to some semblance of a new life that we can all curate together. And for a lot of the people that we're talking about here, learning in some of these new ways, they're going to adapt to all sorts of new things. You get put into new environments, and if you've ever gotten out of I'm talking pre-pandemic times here, if you've ever been in new situations, you've moved someplace, you had an extended vacation someplace, you pick up new habits in your new place pretty easily. One of the things that I'm working with a lot of families with younger kids on is just kind of normalizing, like, yeah, kids are going to learn the mute symbol before they learn their full alphabet. Where some of these might be concerning is when some of the habits that I'm concerned about is the young kids who are unfortunately spending a lot more of their free time on screens and not being to have some of the other friends, and just having to deal with life in ways that don't involve just turning to YouTube or anything else, Netflix, that is becoming an overly big part of their habits.
Yeah, and thank you, Kate Fry, for the raid. Welcome, all new people. This is Kurt, professional therapist, Mr. Therapist, as dubbed on stream and by the people in Discord. And if you have any questions for him or myself, please go ahead and toss them in chat. If you put just Kurt Cole in your question, it'll definitely jump out at us more, but I am looking pretty carefully. Yeah, sorry. I was trying not to interrupt him, but thank you very much, Kate Fryan. Welcome welcome to my stream. Please make yourself at home. But I did see a question in there, actually. What's your opinion on having cameras as a requirement in school, even if you're uncomfortable? It's either put your camera on and feel bad or fail school.
Yeah, so this is a really big debate for a number of reasons on the education thing. I'm a professor of master's level students, so these are typically grown adults, and I frankly don't care because they're making an investment into their own education, and it's not my responsibility to force them to learn in that kind of an environment. Where I talk about this with a lot of educators and administrations at schools is having a blanket requirement for cameras to be on sets some kids up for a variety of reasons a lot more of a harsh learning sort of thing. It can be things like, and the way that I've talked with schools about this where they've really got it is for especially kids who are trans, who identify as trans, who are maybe, going through the transitioning process or don't like seeing their own picture up, that can be emotionally triggering them. This is not providing a good learning environment for them in the first place. That if they're more self-conscious, they're not engaging with the academic material. For other kids who may come from a background where, their background that is being shown on the Zoom camera is not something that other kids need to see, that especially when you see wealth disparities in classrooms, this is something where that can ostracize some kids more than others. And so if you get, if you trust your teacher enough, this might be a way of creating some sort of space here. But I know that some sort of districts end up with, kind of these really draconian policies that are just very rigid. And, unfortunately, there's a lot of institutions right now that are just kind of looking at the calendar being like, we've only got 1 month, we can't change some of these policies, and hopefully we're going to be back in person in the fall. And unfortunately, those are situations where we have to just kind of deal with it. It sucks, I know, but that's something to face there.
I mean, so do you think that there's a value in going back to school on campus, or do you think that there's gonna be some benefits lost in moving away from an online schooling, in the sense of just how much more personalized I think it was able to be made because the curriculum was all via computers? It was much easier to communicate with other students, to form Discord servers, to form to even transfer just the information from class to tutors and stuff like that. Just the forced modernity of it all, if that's a term that exists.
This is something where, as I'm working with more and more people, teachers and families and even children that are coming back into this kind of an environment, most people are seeing more benefits of returning back to school. Now, part of that depends on the reopening plan of the school. And I know a lot of the Los Angeles area schools where most of the families that I work with are from, the middle school and high school program there is entirely stupid. They're having kids go into their homeroom and then Zoom to their other classes throughout the day from their homeroom class. They can do that stuff from home. There's very little, educational benefit of them going and doing something at school in the same way that it's, could have been done at home. But I am hearing some positive things from educators and stuff of being able to take some of these things that have worked really well online and trying to recreate them in the classroom. And some of the smart classrooms that were in development before this were already utilizing some of these techniques. And I think that it's going to vary from teacher to teacher of how well they implement that going forward. But I think for a lot of teachers who were able to see some kinds of engagement early on with some of the online learning stuff, I'm hopeful that they'll be including a lot of that in the in-person classroom stuff when they return that way.
Yeah. So I think that, you know, what would you suggest to someone, again, because I see in chat is like just dealing with nerves of trying to go back to the way it was. I think some people, especially, you know, people that were already introverted got very enabled, and even some extroverts became introverts throughout this whole process. And so just the intimidating, just daunting, you know, looming over event of returning back to it all, or running back to all these people in front of a classroom full of people, presentations and friend groups and all that stuff. You know, is there any advice you have for them?
You know, one of the best things that you can do for yourself is be an advocate, and, you know, being able to ask for, here's things that help me learn. And I think more and more institutions are embracing that not everybody learns in the exact same way. And that was something that has dominated education systems all across the world for decades, if not centuries, of everyone sit here, do this at this certain time sort of thing. That was kind of just this forced institutional sort of training. I think that there's more embracing of, you know, people learn in different ways. People, you know, might need to, you know, be able to get up and stretch and that kind of stuff in the middle of class. And as long as you're not, you know, distracting everybody else, being able to, you know, ask, you're oftentimes able to get a lot more just kind of success if you get over that first fear of just being like, hey, you know, teacher, this is something that helps me learn the best. Is it okay if I do this every so often? You'd be surprised at how many teachers will say yes. And, you know, one of the things that I tell a lot of my clients is, if you don't ask, you're automatically saying no to the situation. So if somebody's gonna say no, let that be their no rather than your no.
Yeah. I mean, do you find, because I think it is very interesting that you teach now, having been a student, I mean, do you find that has given you the ability to see kind of the whole paradigm shift in education over the years, and what things have you liked that have changed, and what things do you wish hadn't changed so much?
So even before I was a teacher, I was a behavioral therapist working in the schools for a few years. And so I got to see especially the special education end of things, where it was really having to do a number of different creative learning things to get, you know, not only the students that I was assigned to, but the other students in those classrooms that I was in, of, you know, being able to try and reach all students. And I saw some really wonderful teachers be really effective at it, and I saw some of those teachers who just really didn't care. And I saw how creating that environment for the most number of kids possible really did help change it. And I think that that's becoming more and more prevalent. Unfortunately, some of this, you know, on an institutional level is, you know, waiting for some of those teachers who can't make that transition work, waiting for them to retire. But overall, I am really happy to see some of the trends move in this way.
Yeah, sorry. Someone asked if you're aware we are streaming. Yes. Mr. Therapist here is aware that we are streaming. He's here for y'all. If you guys have any questions at all, again, please feel free to ask them. Yeah, we're happy to answer them to the best of our abilities.
Yeah. And just kind of time-wise, I probably gotta jump off here in about 10 minutes and deal
That's
with some of the
perfect.
stuff
I was thinking about using that timing as well. That was kind of what I had going on. Because it is for those of you that don't know, my first day back after a subathon that was like 120 something hours. So you know, today we'll be on the shorter end of streams, but don't worry, we'll be back tomorrow at 10 p.m. again. And that will be with a lot more content, a lot more gaming. But yeah, today we're doing a nice easy stream. Everyone's like, make sure to take it slow, even take a week off if you need it. But I thought, you know, a nice balance would be a therapy stream. I thought that'd be good for the mind and the soul. How do you deal with people who are anxious? That's a great question.
Dealing with other people who are anxious. So I'm assuming that this is where the people around you are the anxious ones, and I'm assuming you're also going to be friendly with these people. There's a lot of not taking on their anxiety for them that I try and encourage other people to do. It's something that I do, which is just being present for them, but it's letting them actually have to deal with their own anxiety, because the more that we take on other people's feelings for them, the more that they're going to rely on us to just continue to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, because I actually, like you said, I mean, I have quite a few people. My siblings are very deeply anxiety, and obviously, like, having my own thing helps because it gives me a level of relatability to kind of use to try and best respond. But I think that, again, just in those moments, it's really like a lack of control and certainty. And so, what I found in my personal experience is just, being a constant, right? Being very predictable. So for me, it's just kind of sitting quietly, talking very calmly, and just kind of reminding them that they're okay, that it might feel like things are spitting out, and that, the world is not ending. The sky is not falling. It is okay that you do not feel okay right now. And I know that you will be. And I hope you know that too. Right. And just kind of reminding them of that, I find is always the most effective way that I can help someone who is suffering in anxiety, and people can help me when I'm suffering from anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot of just being in that space. I spend a lot of my days talking with people who are very anxious about a lot of things, and it's being calm enough within myself to and even practicing in those moments with them of like, all right, this too will pass. And so being able to just kind of get through this moment, knowing that we'll get to a moment where things will hopefully calm down again.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that there are any really key things? I guess the best way to phrase it is, what are the most common source of anxiety that you see in the day-to-day?
So lately it's a lot about reopening plans. Are we ready? Are we ready to go back to school? Are we ready to go back to work? Are we ready to be around other people?
Do you think we are?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Do you think we are?
Excuse me. I am not a public health specialist by any means, so this is entirely an opinion.
Okay.
There's no blanket answer on this one. That depending on where you are in the world, depending on what even down to your particular neighborhood is, a lot of it's going to rely on people hopefully going out and making good decisions, but also keeping appropriate measures in place for the number of people that we all know are not going to make those appropriate decisions, to where the effects of that are pretty minimal.
Perhaps I can make that a fair question. Do you personally feel ready, or do you think it's kind of daunting? Is it something that you get any anxiety about, the idea of just kind of being back around people as much, or are you just kind of chomping at the bit to get back out there?
I'm kind of in the middle of both. As a healthcare worker, I was fortunately one of the first in line people to be eligible for getting vaccinated. And so I've been vaccinated for a few months now, and I know for myself that it was something that once the 2 weeks had passed after my second shot, that I was, for myself, feeling a lot more comfortable being able to go out and go to the levels that I hadn't allowed myself to go out to before, maybe a little bit more frequent backyard social distancing sort of gatherings with some of my friends, that kind of stuff. I think that, as I see other people go through, some of this process too, I'm sensing a lot of people feeling that same sort of feeling, which gives me more confidence that we're ready for those kinds of things. So I'm noticing myself, I'm not itching to go back out there. I know that there's plenty of people who haven't gotten the opportunity to get vaccinated yet. I think that, this is where I'm cautiously and hopefully being kind of optimistic about our next steps here.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things where I actually have managed to get fully vaccinated. And it is weird because I find myself still very holed up. Everything in LA is kind of starting to open back up again, but I don't know. It's a little better than before. Like, I used to go to a grocery store and see someone in the aisle, and I would just wait at the far end. I'd wait for them to leave. I wouldn't go in there. I wouldn't share an aisle with them. Like, I was so worried. And for those of you that like are feeling like, wow, that's really over the top, like a disclosure for myself is that one of my siblings has a compromised immune system, so it would have been really bad for me to have caught it. So yeah, I was very paranoid throughout the whole thing. But that is something that you ingrain in yourself so strictly that it is hard to break out of that at the end of the day, especially like even being around people that are also fully vaccinated and have been for a while. And even if they don't interact with other people, just kind of, again, getting comfortable. Like, I get in an elevator, and this is honestly what I feel is like, it just feels wrong to be around people now, to be within 6 feet of people now. It just feels like I'm fighting an instinct at this point. Well, like, especially sharing an elevator.
Yeah, and there's still some guidelines that we should follow. Like, if you can afford to take the next elevator, take the next elevator. And I think there's going to be a very natural awkwardness of as restrictions tend to get lifted, as more people are putting themselves out into any of these environments. We're all going to be awkward kind of about things. Let's not pretend that we're not going to be. Like, we're all going to have to retrain ourselves to be in this situation. And that part of it is completely normal considering what we've all just been through.
Yeah.
And if there's a couple of themes here tonight, one of them is just like, let's accept like this is where we're going to be at as a people. Let's not fight it. Like, and the less that we fight that piece of it, the easier it is to go back into these situations.
Yeah, and I think that was something that also to clarify, I haven't been in elevators with people. It was actually a dream I had, where it was like the pandemic wasn't happening. I just like everything was chill in the dream. I was just having like a nice day somewhere, and then I got in an elevator, and then that's where I just started to like feel almost panic of just like, this isn't right. This isn't supposed to be a thing. And then I like woke up and I'm just like, that was weird. I like panicked because there was someone else in an elevator, and it wasn't even like it wasn't severe or anything, but it was just weird that I felt so unsettled from something that's so, normal or used to be normal.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be kind of the weird things that we face like going forward.
Yeah.
But I mean, is there anything that you miss in particular that was normal, or even just as an activity, I guess, in general?
So one of the things that I've found for myself that I really am looking forward to going back to is going back to concerts and like live music performances. That there's something for me that occasionally likes being in those large groups of people. It's not like a everyday sort of thing for me, but just all being able to get together and be in the moment, enjoying what's going on, being entertained. I'm looking forward to some concerts when the world opens back up.
Is there a particular first one you're chomping at the bit for?
So there's the concert that I have tickets to that has been rescheduled a couple of times. I have to admit, my kind of music is 90s alt rock, grunge sort of things. I cannot wait to go back or to go see Alanis Morissette at the Hollywood Bowl. I'm mostly going because my favorite Absolute band is opening for her, and that is the band Garbage. I cannot wait to go back and see them. And then there's the band that I know that they aren't scheduled anything yet, but there's a band called Screaming Females out of the East Coast, New Jersey area that I can't wait for them to make it out to the West Coast and see them in person.
Yeah. So I think that I've consumed your time here, but just like any closing remarks or thoughts you think are important for you to leave the people with.
I think that it's something where if you've been listening to this, you're obviously got a lot of questions about. Oh, excuse me. A lot of questions about mental health, about relationships. Don't be afraid to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
And reach out to a mental health professional if that's something that you need. There's a lot of us who are not just kind of those old stuffy kind of classic cliche like just sit there and talk to me for an hour sort of people. And don't be afraid to ask questions of your therapist of how they work, how they respond to things.
Yeah.
Because again, it's really important that the match works better than just going to a therapist.
Yeah.
And a lot of us are more than happy to give 10 or 15 minutes of seeing if it's a good fit before even deciding that you have to work together. And if that's something where you don't feel that it's quite the right fit for you, go on and talk to the next person. So get some therapy if it's something that you think is going to be helpful. Don't be afraid to speak up to your therapist, because it's your time and it's your money that's making that process go. And so you can kind of command some responsiveness out of your therapist too, in a way that ends up working for you.
Yeah. And then not to to rail the end there, but there was one last good question I saw in chat, which I don't know if you read that, which was that someone was dealing with their sibling who was struggling with panic attacks, but when they go to help, their sister pushes them away. So what any advice on just trying to help people that don't really want it, frankly, that are just kind of very resistant to things like therapy, to classic solutions?
This is something where the answer on your end is a lot of patience and a lot of just consistently showing up. That knowing that you can't force the process it's a skill that I had to learn as a therapist very early on. Is that I can't make people feel better. I can't make people want to hear the things that I've got to say. Can't make them follow through on things. But if I keep showing up and I keep providing the space for them to eventually come to me, especially with something like panic attacks, it's a really horrible experience for a lot of people who are going through them. That you can just consistently say, I'm ready when you're ready to get my help. Like, I'm here, I'm offering it to you. And you might need to remind her of this a ton of times, but this is kind of in that classic line of, like, you can lead a horse to water but you can't make it drink. You can consistently show up for somebody, but you can't make them end up taking your help.
Yeah. And then Ari, I know you've kind of been sitting in the wing there. Is there anything you'd like to add throughout this conversation? I know you've kind of been a bit removed for today, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts that have just kind of come to you.
No, I think you covered it all.
Yeah. Well, then I guess this is my point to thank Kurt very, very much for coming on and talking with y'all and just being your awesome self. Thank you so much for, especially during these times, taking the time out. And I think chat got a lot out of it. Yeah, there you go. In chat already, everyone's been talking about how awesome you are. I think I saw Kurt equals Poggers up in the chat, which is a very good compliment here on Twitch. And wish you well. And I think that chat for today, again, like I said, this I think is where we wrap up. And I thank you all for being here very, very much. But I will be back tomorrow at 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, as I am every single day except for Mondays. And I hope I see you there. I think tomorrow we might try Celeste. And then on Thursday, we're going to try and wrap up It Takes Two. So I hope I see you all there. All right. Thank you very much for all being your awesome selves. And I hope I see you in the next one. Peace, chat.